Mayberry is a young woman who I want to talk about for a minute. Maybe you know who she is already, and if you do, that's great. If you don't know who she is, that's okay. I'm going to tell you who she is, and I'm going to tell you why it's important that we talk about her, why it's important that we know her name. This is an article that was published on the National Review by Ryan Mills, and I want to read you a little bit about Kat Mayberry. This is what Mills writes. He says, Kat Mayberry grabbed her backpack and ran out the door. With no jacket, hat, or gloves, she ran through snow flurries on a cold Minnesota day. She ran down the street and down the hill. She ran down the nature trail near her family's home and a southwest suburb of Minneapolis. Trent Mayberry, Kat's dad, ran after his 20-year-old daughter. He caught up to her and grabbed her by the backpack, stopping her. They sat together on the frozen ground. Trent cried. Kat was scared, but otherwise expressionless. Catherine, I love you so much, he said to his daughter. We are trying to help you. You've got to let me go, Kat replied softly. Just let me go. Trent guided his daughter home, holding the straps of her backpack and using it to direct her like a joystick. How could this girl, walking like a zombie, be the same girl who just a few years earlier had been a sunny honor student and varsity athlete with a world at her fingertips? Sure, she'd been using marijuana, but to Trent, it was just pot, basically harmless. Trent sat Kat in the backseat of the family's car with her mother, Jane, and drove her to a nearby Hazleton addiction treatment facility. Kat had agreed earlier to go, communicating mostly with nods, but when it came time to leave, she ran. And when her parents eventually got her there, she wouldn't or couldn't engage with the center's staff. We can't force people to be here, Trent recalled a staff member telling him. Your daughter won't talk to me, hasn't said anything. There's just nothing we can do. Desperate, Trent and Jane took their daughter to the emergency room. It was there in the fall of 2018 that they finally got the first real understanding of what was troubling her: schizophrenia. For 6 years, Trent and Jane Mayberry had a front row seat to their daughter's spiraling descent into psychosis. Her inability to communicate, her increasingly disheveled appearance, the piercings, the tattoos. She heard voices. She had friends who likely weren't real. Her descent ended in methamphetamine use and ultimately a deadly overdose. Both Trent and Jane are convinced that their daughter's heavy marijuana use is to blame. I'm 100% certain that it came from cannabis, Trent told National Review of his daughter's psychosis. If she never used cannabis, there's a very high likelihood she would never have had these types of symptoms. Catherine Mayberry was born in June 1998 when inhaling marijuana was still potentially disqualifying for presidential candidates. Over her lifetime, shifting public opinion had increasingly backed legalization of the drug for medical and recreational use. In pop culture, marijuana users have tended to be portrayed as harmless slackers who just want to make a White Castle run or get high in their parents' basement. The drug has acquired such a benign reputation in American culture that then Senator Kamala Harris felt comfortable joking about her history of use on a live radio broadcast when running for president in 2019. Then this article goes on to read, the cultural makeover that led to widespread legalization has tended to hide a disturbing truth. Listen to this very closely. Marijuana has never been the harmless drug that some advocates portray it as, and the high-potency versions today can be dangerous, particularly for heavy users and young people whose brains are still developing. Several studies have linked heavy use of high-potency cannabis by young people to psychiatric disorders, including psychosis, with researchers increasingly concluding that cannabis has a causal role. Trent and Jane Mayberry do not believe they can hold back the tide of legislation in their home state, blah, 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 but they're working on it. Trent says, we're trying to at least tell people this is not a harmless drug that everyone thinks it is. All we've got is the evidence in the world. We've lived it, he said. We lost a kid to it. Now, maybe you're sitting there and thinking, Liz, I've smoked weed all my life. It's totally harmless. You get a little high. It's kind of like getting buzzed or drunk. No harm, no foul. I never got any psychotic thoughts. I've never heard voices in my head, nothing. It's hard for me to sit here and believe you when I've tried this so many times. My friends have tried this. This is something we do on a regular basis, and we've never had any results like this. And I totally get that. I totally get that. That's true, in fact. Most people that use marijuana probably won't descend into schizophrenia and psychosis, but it's the same sort of thing as alcohol and alcoholism. Most people that drink alcohol don't become addicted to alcohol. They don't become alcoholics. But a percentage of people do, enough so that we warn that any use of alcohol is a risk that could lead to alcoholism if you're predisposed to it, if you're a person that may have an addictive personality. We don't do the same sort of thing with marijuana. We don't say, listen, you might be fine. You might be one of the people that's unharmed by this, but maybe you won't be. And the consequences, if you're not, are really, really serious. Again, every time I talk about this topic, I can hear the people right now clickety-clacking on their laptops. I'm smoking weed right now, Liz. I'm eating an edible. This is something that I've done since high school, and it's no big deal. That's fine. You can believe that. But here's what I would challenge you. In every situation in our country, when the prevailing narrative has told us something, take COVID, for example, the prevailing narrative, the experts, the cultural norms, have we believed it because that's what we've been told? Or have we compared the prevailing narrative, what we've been told, with the actual facts and data, the scientific studies, the ones that were done with solid methodology? And if your answer, and I think it is because I know you, if your answer is, well, we don't believe prevailing narratives just because Dr. Fauci says it, just because the CDC says it, just because the American Academy of Pediatrics says it, we look at the actual facts, we look at the data, we look at the empirical evidence, and that's how we draw our conclusions. If that's what your answer is about COVID, then I would challenge you and say, why isn't that how you think about marijuana? I want to read you a statistic here. The amount of THC, which is obviously the active component, marijuana, most people know that, has climbed. The pot that we saw in the 1970s is not the marijuana of today. In fact, THC is sometimes 10 times stronger in marijuana today as it was in the 1970s. So it's not even a matter of comparing, oh, you know what, I did that in the 1970s and I turned out totally fine. It's a completely different drug. It just has the same name. It's intended to be addictive. It's intended to be stronger, 5 to 10 times higher compared to just 20 years ago. And of course, potency of these drugs, that correlates to different reactions, and there is ties to violence and psychosis. We're going to get to that in a minute because I'm not just saying this. I'm not just trying to be a buzzkill, pun intended. I'm not trying to rain on your parade. I'm trying to communicate that we have been culturally brainwashed by the left. And I'm talking like all the way up to the top of the left here. So we've been told lately, when it comes to Donald Trump and his indictment, we've been told that we can't talk about George Soros and his relationship to this indictment. The fact that he gave $1 million to an organization that spent $1 million on the election campaign of Alvin Bragg, the DA from Manhattan, right? We're told, oh, we can't talk about George Soros because if we talk about George Soros, that means we're anti-Semitic. Why? What? Because George Soros is Jewish, so we're not allowed to criticize him. I don't understand that standard. That's not anti-Semitic. That's not the definition of the word. Nothing at all. We're commenting on the political activism of George Soros. But George Soros is tied to this revolution that happened in our culture, in our country, when it comes to marijuana as well. Hi guys, it's Liz Wheeler. Don't forget to watch my show, The Liz Wheeler Show, every night at 7 p.m. on the First TV. You can download the free First TV app, or you can visit thefirsttv.com/Liz and start watching today.
Liberals and progressives want to suppress the truth and distract you from what really matters. Don't let that happen. Sign up for the new daily email that's become essential reading for true conservatives. Get the Up First newsletter. Visit thefirsttv.com and sign up today.